Good evening. How's everybody?
Great.
Good. Thank you all for being here.
So Marcia and I have known each other for 22 years. We met doing a picture called
Spitfire Grill.
Spitfire Grill. And I was the owner of the Spitfire Grill. And I had a rather interesting part, cranky old lady.
A stretch.
And there was another interesting part. A young girl was kind of the lead. And then the third part was Marcia, who played a waitress named Shelby. And it didn't look like a very interesting part to me. And I didn't know her at all. And then we got around the table the first day for the reading. And we were reading along, and then along comes Marcia. She said one line, and I went, "Who's that?" There's something inexplicable about an actress who's got that thing, and she does. Reading this book, I started to have an answer to that question, who's that? I never really understood the fullness of her. I felt it, but reading the book, I realized that she had a very colorful and deep and interesting and educated and cultured early life, as opposed to mine, which was in Detroit and quite different. Marcia was one of 5 kids. Her father was a naval officer. Her mother was a creative, interesting woman who practiced the art of Japanese flower arrangement, Ikebana. And because of her father's profession, they lived in Greece and Texas and Japan and Maryland. And I must say, I envy your early life. It was really very rich. But here we are with me, an entirely different kind of life, with no education, but we end up in the same profession with a respectable amount of success, I would say, both of us.
If the acting thing doesn't work out for you, Ellen, let me know.
And I wonder if you didn't have that wonderful background, who would you be?
That's a really good question. Because I come from a family of 5. So we all had the same background, and we're all incredibly different people. I have a sister who's a forensic toxicologist. I have a sister who's an artist. She was an interior designer at the VA. I have a sister who's an amazing mother, and she used to be in politics and work for Chanel and work for Reagan, the Reagan administration. And I have a brother who's a photographer. So something in all of that is has to do with the arts. But what makes us actors? I mean, I remember going on this little stage in our home in Japan and doing what we called front porch theatrics. And I would say it was just a fair amount of exhibitionism, that I loved being looked at. I learned how to upstage somebody really quickly. I was absolutely shameless in trying to get the laugh. And I liked the attention. I liked leaving myself behind. I liked creating something new, a new persona. But really what I love is words. You know, I love words. I love the way words fall on a page. I love speaking words and saying words. So I think that background influenced me to be a gypsy in a way, to love what I do so much. But it's some ephemeral quality that makes us want to be actors. I mean, I think we're healers on some level. Sorry. Thank you. I think actors are healers, and maybe it was a way of healing myself.
Can you really do that?
Yeah, well, not gracefully, but I did it. I just spilled it.
No, it's the plastic bottles. They make the bottles so you pick them up and the water jumps out. That's not right.
You know those stupid things in Glamour where they're just like us. So I totally have spilled all over my lap. They're just like us, right?
Stop, Marcia, stop. It's not working.
Okay, I'm done.
So, when you decided to write this book, had you ever written before? Did you journal as a kid?
No. I wrote diaries. It was like, Mom was really mean to me today, and Dad sucks, and, things like that. Like questioning God, certainly in the diary, of how can there be a God if my dad could spank us, that kind of thing, like the way kids are going to do. But never writing, never playing with words in that way. And Alvin Sargent, Ellen, right? Did he write something you were in, Alvin Sargent, the screenwriter?
I don't really know him, no.
He did Ordinary People. He wrote Spider-Man. He wrote Paper Moon. He's a great screenwriter. And he was living next door to me. And I wanted to write this story about Mom, sort of chronicling the seasons of her life. And he's the one who said, write for 20-minute stretches, which I did. And then he said, stop thinking about it. Just let whatever comes to you come to you. And that's maybe when I left the journaling sense of it. This happened, this happened, this happened. And it became a little bit more lyrical, a little bit more fantastical, because I stopped thinking. There's a scene where Mom and I are, and I said call them scenes. Did you, when you wrote your book, call them scenes? There's a scene where I did this or I did that.
You said that again? I'm a little deaf.
Sorry, I can speak into the mic. I refer to the book often, there's a scene where I did this or a scene where I did that, or a scene where I'm writing about me and my mother. And I wonder if you did the same thing writing your book.
No, see, I had journaled my whole life, so I had all of my journals way back from the very beginning. So I called on them, and I hadn't read them. And so when I decided to write my book, I started rereading my journals. And it was really weird because I would yell at myself, listen to what you just said, idiot. And sometimes it seems to have heard me.
Well, there's moments in the script where I'm not in a reality world. So there's the script, I just call the book a script, where my mother flies out and embraces the moon, where my mother flies with Tony Kushner's Angels. I don't know if anyone has seen Angels in America, but he talks about angels kind of healing the hole in the ozone and healing people's lives and sicknesses, and my mother joins these angels. And so there's an element of sort of non-reality, of fantasy in the book, and I think Alvin gave me that by just saying stop thinking about it, just write what you feel. And then someone else later said the truth can transcend facts at times, and I thought, oh, that's really helpful, because I don't want to just be, in 1959 I was born, and that wasn't how I could write. So I felt that's okay, the truth and the metaphor transcends fact sometimes.
But also, I noticed something, Marcia, that your acting took over in some places where you became the age that you were writing about, so that your voice changed to that age.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. There's a really early, I'm just going to say scene because that's what I call it. There's an early scene in it where we're young and we get on this plane, and it's a Pan Am plane, and it's going over to Japan. And it's the first time I've been on an airplane in my life. And I noticed when I was writing it, the rhythm of how I was writing, of us noticing the stewardesses with their gloves and their hats, and they're describing the airbags and the things under the seat to put you on. And my God, there could be sharks outside in the water. It became the way a kid wrote. And I would talk to my editor, Rakesh, at Simon & Schuster, Atria, about it, because I wanted him to know that that was the voice of choice. It wasn't a mistake that there were no periods, right? Remember that, Rakesh? He's here. So there was one point, and remember, I had written Pan Am Midnight. We ate eggs at Pan Am Midnight. And he said, oh, just make it midnight. And I said, no. It has to be Pan Am Midnight because we're in the middle of the air. And so he let me keep that one, but then there were other ones that he wisely did not let me keep. But you're right. It's your voice.
Yeah. Would you mind if I asked you to read a couple of pages? I just love this section. Did I bring glasses? Wait, hold on. I have hearing aids. I have glasses. It's all falling apart here. It's in I marked it. It's in Japan. Imagine living in Japan as a kid. What a good thing to do. Maybe it's 60. How do you say ban oi, the dance?
Oh, the Bonadori.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Here. So, I think if you start on 64
Okay.
and go to the end of 66.
So where she's having me start in the book, we're living in Japan. My dad is a military officer, and he's been stationed in Japan. And I go through the book talking about Ikebana. My mother studied the Japanese art of flower arranging, which is Ikebana, and there's very specific rules. It's a beautiful art. It's very spiritual. And at the end of this, my father's come home on leave. He'd be away for like 6 months at a time, and he's come home on leave. And we're on the Navy base, and we're going to a harvest festival. And I say, as the sun sets and dusk settles the waiting crowd, the Bonadori Festival begins. I was only 9 when I first sang and danced the joyful Bonadori song under the inky black sky, glittering with golden stars, yet I've never forgotten it. To this day, it is my standby song. I sing it when prodded to participate in talent shows. I sing and dance it around campfires. I embarrass my children with my yodeling Japanese voice and the studied dance movements of a rice farmer. It's in my bones, this ancient song. It fills me with the same sense of freedom I felt that hot July night when I first learned it. The night I got lost, got separated from my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, and found myself in a sea of kimonos and obis under the floating red, pink, salmon, and yellow-colored paper lanterns of the Bonadori Festival, dancing round and round the center temple stand that had been erected that day in the parking lot at the foot of the naval base, dancing crushed in among hundreds of people I didn't know, Japanese men and women and children in their brightly starched cotton yukatas, American soldiers in their starched summer whites, dancing to drums and singing this song. Ame ame huda huda kasanga, again and again. Ame ame huda huda, repeating each verse and movement, dancing round and round in a kind of trance, sweating in the heat that was still rising from the warm pavement, and realizing suddenly that I was alone with strangers under the speckled night sky of Japan, and I was okay. My mom and dad, my sisters, and our Japanese friends were nowhere to be seen, and I was dancing and singing with hundreds of gracious, jet black-haired people celebrating their culture, and I was okay, and I belonged with them. I knew I would probably get in trouble for getting lost and making my parents worry. I knew that I would certainly get a spanking, but I couldn't stop. Like a magnet, I was a child caught in the centrifugal force of the music and swaying crowd going round and round and round and round. Ame ame huda huda kasanga. Safe only in my exact movement and synchronized clapping and clog shoes step, 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 making a hoeing rice gesture, ho, 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 ame ame huda huda, throwing rice over my shoulder and clap. Freedom. It was my first taste of freedom. A heady feeling for a little girl. Again, ame ame huda huda, freedom. Kasanga, under the lanterns, inhaling the smell of grilled teriyaki chicken and rice, and lost in the drums and shamisen guitars. Yanomene omukaya hurashina, floating, wavering flute and twanging instruments filling my ears, bouncing off my pigtails and fluttering with my red ribbons. Pichi pichi kapu kapu na na na, in perfect step to the music. Step, step, step. Ho, ho, ho. Throw the bag over my shoulder and clap. Step, step, step. Ho, ho, ho. Throw the bag over my shoulder and clap. Eventually, as round and round I went, over the yodeling crowd, I heard a thin, scared voice calling, Marcia, Marcia. I looked up past the colored lanterns, and I saw a familiar crescent moon bobbing through the crowd. It was Mom, pale and glowing in her yukata, approaching with her teacher friend, her brown eyes barely hiding her tears of relief. And then Something strange and magical happened without words, because her teacher friend nodded his approval at my dancing with the crowd, and suddenly I wasn't in trouble, and Dad would never know I'd been lost, and I wouldn't get a spanking. They both claimed me, Mom and the teacher, in that moment, as if I'd been with them the whole time. We circled yet one more time, all stepping together. The Nama Yamahuda ended, and they both smiled at the child they had watched dance free and clap.
Yeah, I love that too. Your mom was quite a remarkable woman. Marcia's dealing now with her mother having Alzheimer's, and that's an important part of the book. Her artistry and her incredible sensitivity giving way to losing her memories. Was it because of your mother's Alzheimer's that you started writing the book?
It was. Mom and I had wanted to make a television show, like for HGTV kind of a show. And we wanted to, it would be Mom visiting different people's gardens, and then at the end of it doing a flower arrangement. And we talked about this on the way to Venice during the Venice Film Festival, because Pollock had been nominated. So we were on the plane talking about it, and she asked me which of my friends we could use their gardens. So she was like, Bette Midler? I was like, yes, Bette Midler. I did some charity work for her, Bette Midler. So then she was like, Ellen Burstyn. I was like, yes, Ellen Burstyn. She's my mentor. And Ellen had, at the time, this beautiful house in Nyack where she'd done like Midsummer Night's Dream. I mean, it was just a dream place. And I was like, Ellen would love it. And my friend Cameron Manheim. And so we started creating this pilot for this garden show, and Mom was going to do it. And I wrote it, and my now ex-husband, he helped film it. And she went back to Texas, and we were supposed to make a calendar book of flower arrangements to go along with it. And we received the most tragic news. My brother's children had passed away in a fire. And that was and his ex-wife, and that was it. Like, everything fell off the shelf, and the idea got put on the shelf, and our lives just stood still. And I remember Ellen at that time, because I was 5 months pregnant. I don't know if you remember this, Ellen, but Ellen called me, and she said, you must tell those children that in your stomach that there is joy. Do you remember that? I'm sorry. And she sent me these this tape of classical music that I was supposed to put on my stomach and play for the kids. And so I walked everywhere with like Mozart blaring in my stomach, you know. And that was from Ellen, because it was really hard. When you lose, when there's loss, it's really hard to remember where is joy, and it's not pure at all. So Ellen really was a huge part of helping me recover in so many ways, and always has been. But the book just got put away. Tragedy will do that to you. It stills everything. And years later, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So at that time, I was just pissed off and angry at what she was going through. And at some point I thought, well, let's make that damn calendar book, Mom, because I wanted her to have a legacy that was not Alzheimer's. And as her memory dissipated more, even the calendar book got put on the shelf, and I started writing her memories with the help of Alvin Sargent pushing me. And they eventually became this memoir. I still wanted to do a how-to book, and in fact, when I first met my agent, Lacey, I think is in here somewhere. She's in the room, I hope. Yeah, she's back there. I had full intentions of it was going to be a how-to book. That's what it was going to be. January through December, it's going to be a how-to book. And they said, no, the narrative is really important. And I thought, but I don't know how to structure like a memoir. I don't know what to say. I need January, February. I know how to fill those months full of how-to stuff. And she said, no, really, you should make a memoir. So I wrote about 3 or 4, maybe 5 chapters. And then we took it to New York, where I met a lot of publishers. And then I met my now publisher at Atria, Rakesh. And they agreed, don't make a how-to book. Keep writing these memories. The narrative is important. And so I did. And I wrote maybe 9 of them. And it was supposed to be released last Mother's Day. And I got to the end, and I stopped because it was the hard part. And you're like, if it's going to be authentic, you got to write the hard part. I mean, no one's interested in Pollyanna. I'm not a Pollyanna. I had to write the hard part. But the hard part was about divorce, death, my mother's Alzheimer's, and so I just shut down for about a year and a half, during which time I swear to God I heard that, this. When's she gonna do it? I felt across from New York to California. I felt like I heard the drumming in my ear. It was because they were incredibly patient, actually. But then I went back down and was visiting Mom, and I just thought, get on with it, Marcia Gay, get on with it, because basically, one thing you also taught me, one thing my mother taught me, is to repurpose your pain into something positive. So I thought, you got to get on with it. I wanted her to be here when it came out, even if she doesn't really understand it. She does, her caregiver shows it to her, and she goes, oh my, Marcia Gay. Well, I can't believe she wrote a book. And we're like, it's about you, Mom. I said, well, I can't believe anybody want to read about me. So she still says those beautiful things, and she's still, the essence of her remains the same. It's there. She's gentle, sweet, kind, loving, almost kind of unbelievably so. My mom lacks a certain grit that the rest of us have, I think. There's a demureness about her. So she's still all of those things. But yes, that was the inspiration. I didn't want her legacy to be Alzheimer's. I wanted her legacy to be the beautiful life that she's lived. And it was through storytelling, as we know. It's through storytelling that those memories can go on and be shared. And that's how my kids could get to know her. They don't really know my mom. My older daughter knows her a little bit. But the younger ones, they're 14, they don't really know her. She's been living with this for 10 years and has been markedly apparent for the last 5 or 6 years. So they don't know her. They know her through my stories, which I made them listen to me read all the time. They'd be like, Mom, how much longer? I'm like, I just have to hear how it sounds in the room because I'm an actor. How does it sound? And so they were actually helpful and learned a lot about my mom.
Yeah. I love the part of the book with the May Day ritual.
Yes.
Do you want to read it, or do you want to tell them about it? It was so beautiful.
Well, I can tell you. Does anybody celebrate May Day in this room? Does anybody remember May Day? Good, because there you go. It's May 1st, and it's an ancient, almost heathen ceremony that celebrates May Day. During the days of the Romans, the girls would dance around the maypole, and they were all virgins. They all wore white. And I muse in my book, what happened at night? Did right? Because in the daytime they look great, but at night, I mean, the May Day is about fecundity and mating and sexuality on some level, even though it looks virginal. And it brought me into the idea that maybe my mother was, frightened by those things in life, unfettered lust, those type of things. But in May Day, we would gather around the table with little bouquets, little things we got from the garden. We make little doilies we make little cones, and we'd take the arrangements around and drop them off at people's door and knock on the door. And of course, it's all about hiding. And of course, they know you're there. So it's all about listening to them say, oh, how darling. And like, oh, you surprised them. And then when I lived in Harlem, I would do the same thing. And I would take these around to the different stoops with my kids, and we would all laugh and giggle. And that was the first time I understood that my mother really loved flowers was May Day. So that was when we lived in Garden Grove, California. And it was before she learned about Ikebana, but it was, I think, the first ritual of flowers with my mother was May Day.
And the Ikebana has 3 points to make it, and they're called Earth.
Yep, I can demonstrate it easier. So for people who don't know Ikebana, can you hear me if I put this down here? So for people who don't know Ikebana, it's an asymmetrical triangle. All art is a triangle, right? That's the basis of art. Even a story, the beginning, middle, and end, it's a triangle. So in this one, it's an asymmetrical triangle because it's Asian. Like in Japan, you're never supposed to see the end of the road. All the garden paths have these curves around. So imagine a flat vase. Imagine this is a flat vase, and there's a little spiky thing. So the first line is called sheen, and that is called heaven. And so the sheen line comes up, and we're just going to do it at 10 degrees. So it's above. So it's not here. It's slightly arched. And the second line is called soy. So imagine my arms are pine. There's another beautiful branch of pine here. That's the soy line, and soy is earth. And the third is going to be a big peony, a pink peony, and that's going to be my head, and it's down here, and it's going to face this way. So it's man. Shin, soy, hikai is heaven, earth, and man. And that's the triangle. And then you put little flowers inside. So it had a spiritual basis to it. It was begun by the monks, and my mother practiced it in Japan, and she always had these arrangements in the house. And there's a line in there where I say, I would come home from school and I could almost understand what my mother had gone through, because the flowers would undulate with the toil of my mother's particular day. And she was dreaming about my dad. There might be stargazers, because he was on a ship staring at the stars, stargazers in a blue ceramic vase. And so I use the flowers a lot as metaphor in the script. I use them to describe what my mother's going through in the script and what she's thinking about. They became, I think, a thread that I could weave through the script, which was I know, the book. It's not a script at all. It's a book. I don't know why you keep saying that. Okay, I guess I'm just not used to being an author. There. I'm in the Strand rare book room, and it was a book, not a script.
And the other day,
Yes.
the other day you sent me a present in a little box, and on it said, love, family, and flowers.
Yes.
So that's the
My
triangle.
Yes.
So did you think of that in terms of the book?
No, my publisher did. Rakesh did. They and Lacey, they helped me come up with the title. I had more kind of esoteric names like Falling Awake or, Mindful or things like that. And they really understood the book as my mother's journey and my journey and a passage of seasons. I didn't want it to end, though, with death. But she's still alive, so I didn't want it to be, here we are, everything's happy, and then you go. But that, it did become a structure where the winter season is the darker season. It begins actually with the Oscar stories, which Mom wasn't showing signs of Alzheimer's there, and I don't know why I put the Oscar story at the end, but I did. But then the last two stories, the last two chapters are very dark and maybe hopeful. I hope hopeful, but that when they read it and they were working through it and culling through it, they really understood it as seasons.
Yeah, the religions have tried to make death hopeful for many years now, and
Right.
not too successful.
Well, no, and it's Alzheimer's, right? So just in the most unmincing language, it sucks. You cannot make lemonade from those lemons. And when you do, you feel like a liar. On the bright side, she's still got her beautiful essence. There isn't a bright side.
No.
So I don't feel like doing it. I feel like a liar when I try to say that. It's not a light side. But we always have to throw a but in there. Love is a bright side. And she does, one of the last conversations I had with her was about, she's still alive, before I finished the book, was about love and God. And she basically said, I could see she was thinking of something. I said, what are you thinking about? And she said, God. And I said, what about God? And she said, love. And she said, love, it happens to everybody. The better the thoughts, the better the thinking. And this was my mom's way of saying, basically, fill your head with good, loving thoughts, that's good for the brain. And she's right. It's very good for the brain.
Yeah. I've been reading about Alzheimer's because both my brother and father died of it. So naturally, I'm a little nervous, and I'm sure you are too.
I'm very nervous. I think about it every day.
Yeah. And I was surprised to learn when I was just telling Marcia about it. I looked up. I was reading a recipe that said to wrap the beets in aluminum foil. And I went, aluminum, isn't that bad for Alzheimer's? Is that a good idea? And I looked it up, and it said, never wrap food in aluminum foil. Keep aluminum out of your life. It seeps into the food. So if any of you are using aluminum on your food, stop it. It's not a good thing.
And also they call Alzheimer's diabetes 3. So it is associated with sugar, and it's associated with gluten, and it's associated with inflammation. And so I have teenagers at home, and you can imagine it wasn't a pretty picture when I was trying to pull all of the sugar out of the pantry. But it had to happen because it's in everything, and you can't get away from it. And I just needed to ask them to be aware, which they are now. They're much more aware. I mean, we're by no means pure in any way in terms of what we eat, but they do eat less sugar and they do make more healthy choices. So I figure if it's helpful, why not, right? Why not move on the side of helpful?
Yeah, and they go along with that.
They do.
Yeah,
They do.
because usually teenagers don't care somehow.
I didn't say it was pretty, Ellen, but I said, but they go along with it.
You know what I loved in the book? There's a story you tell about your mother and father and the dress she was wearing, and then you ended that story by saying that years later you wore that dress to your first nomination for a Tony.
Oh, yes. Yes. She had a beautiful red scarlet dress. We're living in Japan, and she had a beautiful red scarlet dress. And they came home. They were at a New Year's Eve ball, and in Japan, and that was rare because we're a military family. We don't have a lot of money. So they were at a ball, and Mom had the gloves and the gown, and it was scarlet. She was gorgeous. And Dad was in his full military dress, and they went to this ball, and while they're gone, all of us kids, what you would do in Japan, there was like a huge base and houses below and houses above. And at midnight, everybody goes out on their porch and bangs their pots and pans. So the whole neighborhood, and I'm talking like a mile and mile up there, is clattering with the sound of pots and pans. I still have a dented pot and pan from when I was 7 years old, and I won't give it up in Japan. And you're banging them for a while, and then you go to bed. And when Mom and Dad came home, they came into the bedroom to kind of wake us up. And they were both tipsy, which, I hadn't really ever seen my mother tipsy. And she kept pulling at his suspenders and going, boing, boing. And I remember watching them walk down the hall and him now pulling at her straps of her dress. And I'm sure there was boing after that, but, and I never why. And so years later, I was nominated for a Tony, and I think it was at the Angels in America. This is before the nomination. It was Angels in America gala, and I wore her beautiful red gown. I had to take it out. She had a 19-inch waist. What is that about, right? What is that? So I had to take it out, 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 inches to wear it. But I did wear her gown, and now my daughter has seen it and says, you will never give that away because she's going to wear it at something. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful gown. And I love that. I love kind of passing down these things. And the book has a lot of that about...
Well, I know of the necklace. Tell them about that.
Yeah, the golden necklace. I have a necklace that my great-great-great-grandmother wore in her wedding. Then my great-great-grandmother. Then my grandmother, then my mother, then my mother gave it to each of us girls to wear in our wedding. And now, is Nathaniel, my nephew, here? He's not here. But now I give it to the nieces and nephews. So I come back and I'm the holder of it, and I give it to everyone to wear. And why it takes on a greater importance is because it's one of the ways we relate to my mother. She has lost the significance. She would be so proud to know that we were doing it, that it mattered, that we're carrying out that tradition. But she doesn't quite know. So what we feel is what's important. And it connects us to her, and it connects us to other women and other really strong women of her era, and before that, and before that, before that. I mean, pioneer women, amazing women. When you talk about women, and I talk about my mother, as I said, she was very demure, but she was fierce. And I was just telling this story a little earlier. My mother grew up in a time of no internet and no cell phones. And which, if I tell my kids that, they're like, Mom, if you say, I had to walk 5 miles in the snow, they're like, oh, that, I get that. But no internet? What was your life like? I don't get that at all. So my mother, we were living in Greece, and now I was older. I was getting ready to go to my first year of college, and my sister was going to her a year of college in Germany, and my older sister was going to a year of college in Rome. Without internet, without cell phones, my mother figured out how to get all of us to our colleges, how to get all of us on planes, trains, buses, whatever, how to make sure we were all in dorms with no support whatsoever other than her ingenuity and a payphone in a hotel. I mean, I think about that, and I think, I don't think I could get from one end of the city to the other without Uber on my cell phone. It's a different era, and there is a fierceness and a tenacity and a patience, right? Because I want things done yesterday because I can have them done yesterday with the internet, and there is a patience. So they did planning, and there was just it was a different lifestyle. was a different moment. And because she was a Dallas lady as well, there was a different genteelness that my mom had.
Well, and she was dealing with that world that was working at the same pace, too.
Right. That's
You know,
right.
So, like, I would be perfectly comfortable if we still were doing Paul Revere, you know.
Yes, I would too.
Send a
I'd be
letter out
comfortable
by
with
horseback.
typewriters.
You what?
I'd be comfortable with typewriters or with the early flip phones. You know, the iPhone 10. There's some girls laughing. There's some fans of mine who came all the way from Canada to be here. And they were laughing. They found me last night on the street, and they were taking pictures. And I wasn't handling the phone. I was like, here, you guys do it. Because, you know, they're millennials. I can't handle the cell phone.
So, as you've been writing, I'm sure you've been studying Alzheimer's. What do you see the future being?
I just went to this place in Las Vegas. It's called the Lou Ruvo Center, and it's a Frank Gehry building. And just to see the beauty of the building, you should look it up on the internet. It's a gorgeous building. And I met with a doctor there named Dr. Cummings. He's a top expert in the field, and he showed me on a computer. We can't say the name of it, or we can't say the company that's behind it, but there is a drug that is coming out that they believe, the researchers and doctors, can disintegrate some plaque and maybe allow Alzheimer's to at least stay. We still don't know the cause of it. We still don't know. I mean, I think of it like a thief that has a lock of a key to every door on the block and is indiscriminate in which block he's going to go to. It feels so random. So naturally, you feel so helpless in the throes of the worry whether you'll get it or not. But he was saying, you know, around the corner are these drugs, so the more money we throw at it, at research, the better. Diet and exercise. Apparently, you have to sweat to make a difference, which is the unfortunate news, but that's really helpful. And you know, a lot of it just makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a duh behind a lot of it, even not just because your mother's told you diet and exercise, but because anthropologically, like when you look at what Leakey talked about or what John Medina, who wrote Brain Rules, talks about, they talk about movement. And you think anthropologically, the human body had 100,000 years of training, nomadic training, and we learned to think on the move. We used to walk 12 miles a day, and we're carrying stuff too, so you're probably sweating, but you're moving, you're full of exercise, and there was no sugar. So that's 100,000 years, or at least 50,000 years of body training compared to the last 100 years, the last 50 years of sugar everywhere, processed food everywhere, aluminum foil everywhere, and nobody moving. People sitting like this or like this in their jobs. So what I'm learning is you can't emphasize movement enough, walking enough, that we are body trained to walk. You can't emphasize good diet enough. Does that mean you won't get it? It doesn't mean that. I felt like my mother was the poster child of what to do not to get it. But of course, there were many insidious things in the diet, in processed food, that she didn't know about. So why is it increased? I just read the statistic that said every 6 seconds, someone gets Alzheimer's, and in about 20 to 30 years, it'll be every 3 seconds. So you think, why? How do you answer that if it's not lifestyle? Like, why is it almost an epidemic? Why? And I don't have the answers. So I read a lot. You know, there's a lot on it. It's becoming more of a buzzword. I think there's more and more people willing to talk about it. They used to call old timers. People were embarrassed to talk about it. My mother, I do believe, is embarrassed by it. People thought you were stupid if you couldn't remember certain things, and now we know so much more about it and how indiscriminate it is.
Well, also we're living longer too, so we have more opportunity to get it.
That's true. That is true.
The statistic I read the other day is if you live to 85, your chances are 50-50.
I read the same thing.
Yeah. So let's just hope that they find a cure.
Right.
I didn't ask what the rules are for this, so I don't know if we're supposed to have a Q&A, but it's
Would you
all
guys
right.
like that? A Q&A? Awesome.
Does anybody have any questions?
Alzheimer's genetic?
There's a genetic factor to it. If you do the 23andMe, you can take a test that'll tell you if that, I think it's called the ALE gene, if you have it. But if you don't have it, it doesn't mean you won't get it. And now they're all talking about it being partially genetic, partially lifestyle. There is someone who started, where is she? She started the Alzheimer's Association of New York, so she might be able to scientifically answer that a little bit better than me. Can't.
From the origins, it was believed to be a genetic passing on the maternal line of the family.
But now they say lifestyle as well, right?
Yeah, and aluminum foil. I threw out all my mother's beautiful aluminum pots that she cooked in every night. And so now they're planters in our house. I wanted to say one thing, Marcia, that as you were talking about your mother and the flowers, my mother was a botanist. And I always wondered if there was something in the pesticides or the chemicals that she used when she was mutating flowers and really working in the garden. And I always thought maybe there was something in that, the chemicals that she used in the garden.
Well, it's all possible. I mean,
Yeah.
toxins in the brain. My mother had 5 kids, and they say lack of sleep is one of the factors that definitely can exacerbate Alzheimer's. So, and Maria Shriver talks about women having a higher propensity to get it than men. And I think, duh, who's up every night with a baby when you have, I think women are sleep deprived for half their life. And who knows? I mean, these are the things that you want them to study. And while it sounds completely ridiculous, because I think, but women have always been having babies. So, but like Ellen said, maybe they would have come down with something like this, but we live longer now. The answers of the why, we just don't know.
One other thing I was going to say about the aluminum, because that was an early finding. So I would suggest with your cans of tuna fish, when you open a can of tuna fish, don't you think that there's some fillings that are going into that can? So be really cognizant of opening cans.
I don't buy food in cans anymore at all. I buy, if I buy tomato sauce or something, I get it in glass jars. And like anchovies from a can, I can taste the can. I get everything in jars now.
Are there other questions? I know you haven't read the book, so it's probably hard to ask questions about the book. But you could also ask Ellen a question about her if you wanted. Or my fans from Canada, no questions? Put the girls on the spot. Okay.
All right, well, I recommend the book. It's a wonderful read. It's very wonderfully written.
Thank you.